Hello and welcome to Instant Transmission, a podcast where we discuss everything Dragon Ball and why tier lists are lazy content. Tonight, we're putting on our judging geese and rating a pile of our favorite techniques from a collection of our favorite characters in a tier list. Some of you may agree with our opinions, others may not, but either way, prepare your jimmies to be rustled because we're about to rank what we think are the coolest techniques in Dragon Ball. I'm your host, Dayton, and once again, I'm joined by my co-host, Todd.
Hi.
Tonight's discussion is actually much more of a conversation as we do a live ranking of some of our favorite techniques in all of Dragon Ball. We've chosen a single technique for most of the main cast and even included a few others that seemed unique enough to toss in. Our tier list goes from the bottom at D tier all the way up to the Z tier. For those listening on YouTube, we will be adding some visuals to help you follow along, so feel free to fact check me at youtube.com/@ITDB podcast. And with all of that covered, was there anything you wanted to add before we got things started, Todd?
I just want to reiterate that we are basically doing a list of, we kind of narrowed this down to one technique per character that we decided on, as well as the fact that this is our tier list based on which one is effectively the coolest technique. So it's very much just our own opinions.
It's oozing with opinion. So it's like I said, prepare your jimmies because there's a lot of opinion in this episode.
But I think we can pretty much jump right into it. I think those of you who are watching on YouTube should be able to see our list here. And Dayton, you can see all the techniques that we've got here, right?
I know. Look at all those little icons you cut out, man. We could start anywhere. There's so many cool techniques, but I'm going to go off our notes and say we should start off with probably the main character just to get him out of the way. And we had to talk about this a little bit. Goku's first up, and he's got kind of an interesting repertoire of techniques we had to go through, but ultimately we landed on the Kaioken as the technique that we found the most interesting that Goku had.
Yeah, this was tricky because Dayton and I talked about these for a while. We won't be missing out on a few other iconic techniques you'll find out here shortly, but the Kaioken, to me, man, at the very least, when it was initially introduced against Vegeta, was very impactful, super flashy, super cool, very cool to see him take out Nappa with that. And then to see him continue to ratchet it up with all of the like downsides that come along with it harming your body against Vegeta just to keep up with him. It was a spectacle to watch for sure.
Yeah, and even when you compare it to a lot of other power-up techniques in Dragon Ball, most of them are pretty linear. It's just you go into the technique, you get stronger, and then the downside might be something like you can only maintain it for so long, or like you get tired faster or something. But I mean, the downside feels kind of arbitrary most of the time, whereas with Kaioken, you could see it and feel it. Like Goku's muscles were like bulging and he was wincing in pain, and in my opinion, is probably one of the most interesting power-up techniques in all of Dragon Ball. And for me, that's why we chose it. I think it's cool as hell.
Yeah, I mean, to add to the fact that this one is a technique, whereas most of the other power-ups are more like transformations. Many of them are kind of like limited to whether it be the Saiyans with Super Saiyan or Frieza in his multiple forms. But even though this one doesn't really get used by anybody else, it arguably could be used by anybody.
I think probably the other technique that I would imagine people might be asking about would be the instant transmission, considering it's the name of our podcast. And why didn't we go with that one? Why did we choose Kaioken over instant transmission?
Oh, that is a good question. The instant transmission, at least to me, and I want to hear your take on this too, Dayton, is honestly, it makes the narrative kind of boring. It's almost overpowered. It is, and it's not flashy. It's awesome. Like you have cool instances where it's combined with like the Kamehameha, but by itself, it's basically just really fast travel, and it kind of makes things too easy for our Z fighters at times. What about you?
Yeah,
Dayton?
it breaks the rules of the universe a little bit too much for me. It also, I mean, I also think of DBZ Abridged a lot, where he's just kind of popping in and popping out places, because that's what he uses it for. He uses it to get around. It also makes like not being in the right place no longer an issue, right? Like that's no longer a stressful thing. Like Goku not being able to get to Namek is no longer an issue he will ever have to worry about. And so distance doesn't matter. It also just like it doesn't look cool when you just see it happen, right? It's not like there's anything on the screen that's happening. There's no auras or powering up or anything really going on. It is fun. It is a neat technique, but I think Kaioken blows it out of the water.
I agree. I mean, the flashiness of like the red aura from Kaioken, watching Goku's muscles bulging and seeing the strain and stress on his body. Yeah, way cooler looking than instant transmission, in my opinion. I feel like we've pretty much talked about most of the facets of this technique. Where do you think we should place this one, Dayton? We've got.
I mean, it's DCBAZ. It could go anywhere. And when I look at this technique and I kind of compare it to a lot of techniques that are in Dragon Ball, I like this one like a heck of a whole lot. And the moment we see it is also a cool moment. I vote for Z tier on this one. I actually think that this is one of the coolest techniques in Dragon Ball.
Man, yeah, I was going to say either A or Z. This is up there for me. So I think if I'm kind of waffling on the two and you're saying Z, I think we have to put Kaioken in Z tier.
Now, we're kicking things off with a high rating, and it'll make more sense once we get a little further into it, because we're going to see that there's a lot of techniques in Dragon Ball that are kind of samey, but we'll get into that.
That's a good point. I think if we're just kind of moving down our list here, should we move to our main bald boy?
Oh yeah, it's Krillin time, and it's Destructo Disc time, and it's Krillin. So part of me wants to just say, why even talk about it? We could just put it Z tier. But no, this is a technique that the first time you see it, for me, it is kind of a wow moment, because up till that point, we had seen, I guess, if you watched Dragon Ball into Dragon Ball Z, we had seen some key techniques that were, focused beams or maybe hitting a whole area. But this is kind of one of the first ones where the key energy is being used in a unique way, almost as like a tool. And so it's cool when you see it. However, I feel like it's a technique that never grows and is kind of, I don't know, it leaves me wanting more after the first time I see it. But I do enjoy it, and I do enjoy it as Krillin's unique technique.
I agree with you. I think to your point about the fact that it kind of never grows, it's not as versatile. Like it's not used in as many diverse ways as some of the other techniques that we'll talk about, right? And I think to your point, that might be one thing that holds it back. Like I still think that it's really cool in the fact that I don't think there's any other technique that really does the same. It falls into like the same niche or category as the Destructo Disc specifically falls into. It can basically cut anything. It's just a disc of energy that can just cut through anything.
Except Cell's neck.
I was just about to say the same thing. Unless you are Cell and you have traps for days, this thing can cut through just about anything. But man, what a cool technique. It cut Frieza in half, even though, that was, I don't know, Frieza kind of stole that technique, or however you want to look at that. But
Frieza borrowed it. And I mean, it's not like Krillin's the only person we've seen use it and Frieza stole. I mean, Goku throws one at some point.
True.
I feel like we've seen a few different Destructo Disc, techniques, but I mean, as far as Krillin goes, that is his signature technique. And for me, I think it is a cool technique. It's not the flashiest technique, though. It doesn't have that like kind of interesting factor that, say, Kaioken has with its downside. But I think it is a lot better than most techniques in the show. I want to put this one in B tier. I think it's above average. I don't think it's anything mind-blowing, but it is cool and it is unique.
Okay, B. I was thinking A or B as well. I think if you're pretty solid on B, then I'll go with that, because I was kind of in between the two. Because man, we'll have to see. We might have to come back and do some revisions as we make it way down our list because well, we'll see where some of these other techniques land because I
I
think
mean,
there's
it's
going
our
to be.
opinions. We can just we can rearrange everything at the end if we want.
That's right. Just go back in and change all of them.
Well, I think I'm going to let you introduce this next one.
So the next one is going to be from our main anti-hero, my main man, Vegeta and his Gallic gun or the garlic gun, however you want to pronounce it.
Yeah, this is I mean, Vegeta doesn't have a very large pool of techniques for us to choose from. And I think we debated between the Gallic gun and the Final Flash. And we kind of went back and forth, but I just think that the Gallic gun was in some more memorable situations. So we kind of leaned towards that one. But as cool as those situations were, and the cool little hand movement he does before he fires it, this one just kind of feels like a key blast to me a little bit. There's not a whole lot of special to it other than I think this one's blue.
It's purple.
Purple. Okay.
And actually, this is a conversation that Dayton and I had off podcast. I think Dayton, your point actually was that this one kind of beats out the Final Flash because of the color, because it's a purple beam instead of the plethora of mostly yellow and blue beams that we get in the show. And this might be the only purple beam attack in the show outside of maybe some like strange side characters.
Yeah, and it sets it apart, right? Like it's when you see that purple that you're seeing the Gallic gun. And so you do get that kind of cool signature style to it. But at the end of the day, aside from some cool hand movements and a purple color, this one just kind of feels like a beam to me. And personally, I put this one in C tier. I don't think it's D tier because it does do a couple things slightly unique, but there's nothing really that special about it.
I'm already throwing it in C because I agree with everything that you said. As much as I deeply love Vegeta and I deeply love the Saiyan Saga Kamehameha versus Gallic Gun struggle, it's just another beam, and there's so many beam attacks. I like it more than I like the Final Flash, like you said, Dayton, because one, because of the color, and two, because Vegeta has his kind of like weird, almost back-turned hand move when he shoots it out. Other than that, it's nothing special, but props for the purple beam, I guess.
Purple's cool. But that wraps up the purple beam blast and brings us into our favorite green character, Piccolo. And for him, we chose the, I think, only ever used once, Hellstone Grenade.
Yeah. There might be one time in Super or something where he pulls it out. I don't quite remember, but I mean, when he uses it against Android 17 in the Cell Saga, it is not only a cool reveal, it is really cool tactically. Like as the balls kind of start to surround 17, 17 is like caught off guard, thinking that these beam attacks are just missing him, and then all of these balls of energy that Piccolo shoots out just coalesce onto his target. And I mean, they could be like effectively they're creating like landmines. It's like field control of the area. It's pinning in your enemy. It's devastating in terms of power, even though 17 uses his barrier to block it. It has a lot going for it. It's really, really cool.
Yeah, it's fun. It's interesting. It's not just another beam. And I personally love this technique from way back on the Nintendo Wii. I used to play Tenkaichi Budokai on it all the time.
Hell
and
yeah.
Just that technique is so cool. And in that game, Piccolo raises up his hand and then curls his hand into a fist, sucking all of those balls like into the center for that final explosion. I mean, there's just some flavor to it that other techniques just don't have. I think this thing's cool as hell. The only thing I feel like this is missing is like a signature color or just a little bit more like flair or pizzazz. But outside of that, I love this technique. For me personally, I give this one an A tier.
This is an easy A for me as well. Yeah, I think I agree with you. Like maybe if it had, like, visually, it's cool to see all the balls surrounding the target, but in the end, they are. I think I would knock it because they're basically just yellow balls of key energy.
Yeah,
That's probably the only thing I'd ding it for.
it's just Key Blast, right? But they're being used very, very creatively. And it's one of those
Right.
things where if Piccolo would have gone forward with that and maybe continued developing that technique, who knows what crazy crap it could be doing. Like, I think that was an awesome beginning of something interesting that maybe they should explore a little bit more in the future.
Yes. Yeah, I very much agree with you. So yeah, we'll put the Hellzone grenade in our A tier, which, ooh, I think that brings us to.
You ready? You ready to wrestle those jimmies?
Oh yeah.
So up next is Piccolo's protege, Gohan. And Gohan's technique that we chose is the special beam cannon. Oh man. And we were able to give him this technique because he uses it in the movie. What was the name of that movie? I can't remember.
Dragon Ball Super Superhero. You
That's
can't
what it
remember
was.
because it's such a ridiculous name.
So he fires off that technique. And I remember we had that conversation about, like, what do you think about him knowing that? And to me, it fits. It absolutely makes sense that Gohan would learn the special beam cannon.
Oh yeah, I agree. Man, I gotta say, as far as we're talking about which of these techniques is like coolest for the most part, I feel like Gohan firing off the special beam cannon in the superhero movie is probably the coolest this technique has ever looked. I mean, you might argue that there's maybe too much 3D graphic stuff going on, but man, the visual spectacle of this blast when he fires it off in the superhero movie is incredible. It's I mean, it looks unlike any other key blast in my opinion. There's so many different colors and so much going on. It's just really cool.
For me, it's this weird area with it where it is a key blast, right? It's not doing anything unique, but as far as the just normal key blasts go, this has the coolest looking design to it. The way it almost looks like it's drilling through the air as it's flying towards its target. And most of the time when it's fired off, it feels pretty special most of the time. So I'm in a weird spot with this one because I love this technique, but also deep down in my heart, I know it's kind of just a key blast, but it's a really freaking cool key blast. And so I don't know if I want this one in A tier or B tier. I'm conflicted.
I'm right there with you. I was leaning towards B tier, I'll be honest. And part of that, I think a large part of that is because it is a key blast. Now, I like this better than most other key blasts because it does have some different characteristics. Like you said, Dayton, it visually looks different. It has the spiraling looking key and it drills things. So,
I mean, that's pretty cool.
not to mention the idea of this is a technique it has that like charging process, right? Like this technique can get very powerful if you charge it up all the way, but it is also a downside that you have to charge it.
I feel weird about it though because I feel like I've seen like every other key blast get charged though. So like
That's fair.
I don't know. I don't know what makes this one that much more special other than it can't be fired quickly.
Yeah, I guess in the end that's more of just a downside in a way. I don't know. It's tricky. I think with kind of the things that you've said and that I've said, I think I would lean towards B. Does that sound appropriate?
I think I lean towards that too. For me, it's kind of like Destructo Disc is in B tier because like its application's kind of cool, even though it's not like the most interesting looking. And we have kind of the inverse of that with Special Beam Cannon, where the application is pretty normal, but man, is it cool looking.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that feels pretty appropriate. I think that kind of moves us on to our next guy.
Yes, and this is Tien. And Tien is interesting because he actually had a decent assortment of techniques for us to kind of go through and look at. And the one we ended on is what I think is his most unique technique that we definitely don't see enough of, and that is the four witches technique. And for those of you who aren't familiar or don't remember, this is mostly original Dragon Ball, where he grows extra arms like out of his back and begins fighting with four arms. And I'm sorry, this is dope as hell.
I think Dayton was the one who suggested this technique, and when he said this one, I had almost forgotten about this one, but I was completely on board. We also both had to go look up the name for this one because we didn't have any idea what this was called.
It's like, oh yeah, four witches. That sounds like growing arms out of your back to me.
Sure, makes perfect sense. But this is especially in an age of Dragon Ball before Z, when this is much more, the show is much more grounded in martial arts. Getting to use two additional arms to whoop the shit out of your opponent was a big deal. It definitely, I mean, it took its toll on Goku, if I remember correctly, for a little while in one of their fights. I mean, just having to deal with two sets of arms when you have a single opponent against you and you only have two arms yourself to fight against them, that's tough, man. And this thing was pretty cool looking at the time.
Yeah, I don't know, man. I don't know why I think this technique is so neat. I think just in the grand scheme of all the things you see in Dragon Ball, the ability to grow arms out of your back and fight with four hands it just seems so cool to me. I don't know. I'm a big fan of this one. I know where I rate it. I kind of want to let you go first on this one. What tier would you put the four witches in?
Man, if we're talking about which techniques are coolest, I'm not gonna lie. I honestly think I like this better than most beam attacks. I wouldn't, definitely not Z, but I would maybe go A. I might come down to B, but I'm leaning towards A.
I'll go A because I was debating making the argument for Z, but my thing is we never really got to see this in Dragon Ball Z. We only got to see it in Dragon Ball, so we didn't get to see where something like this could go. I mean, the possibilities are awesome. Like the ability to charge up two techniques at once and all. I don't know. I could write for days about this, but we just never get to see it shine as brightly as it could. So I'm gonna go with A.
Okay, I think A feels appropriate. I just want to say the one thing that keeps me from putting this in Z is the fact that even though it was like really grounded in martial arts, I don't feel like we got to see when these came out. It felt less like martial arts and more like just lots of punching. I'll put it that way.
We were getting into that era. There wasn't as much martial arts at that point.
Yeah. But I think that kind of moves us on to our next little guy.
Chiaotzu. And what technique is more memorable than his farewell, Mr. Tien technique? And I want to point out that when I first watched Dragon Ball Z, I had no Dragon Ball context. And so when all this crap is happening with the Saiyans, and this little guy who looks weird as hell goes flying onto somebody's back and just explodes himself, I didn't know who that character was. I had about 5 minutes to meet him, and the first thing he did was say bye and blow up. So that was confusing as hell.
Yeah, more recently, Dayton and I have gone through all of Dragon Ball, and we got the full story of Chiaotzu and Tien. So I think that moment when you watch Dragon Ball Z after that moment hits much harder when you understand the relationship between Chiaotzu and Tien. Now, as far as the technique goes, this one, as far as coolness, like I feel like the narrative weight carries this one a lot. And if I'm having to kind of rate this one without the narrative weight, I don't really think this one is like, it doesn't hit me in the right notes of like either looks cool or is super effective, honestly.
That was kind of the boat I was in. Like the explosion wasn't even cool. Like, I'm sorry, Chiaotzu, but you sacrificed yourself and it wasn't even that neat. I don't know. I mean, you're right. I think the whole point of it is the narrative, it's the emotional weight, but the technique itself, I don't know. It's not the most how do you practice something like that? There's no way to make it better. You get like one shot. Like Vegeta did it way better.
That's true. Vegeta's did look way cooler than Chaozu's, let's be
so
honest.
so the fact that we've got someone else who did this way better instantly makes this one less cool. So for me, this is my first vote for a D tier technique.
I was already on board for putting this in D, so this is going to be our first D. Chaozu, I'm sorry, but you get the D.
Oh man. Oh. So up next, we've got everyone's favorite crater character, Yamcha, and his patented wolf fang fist. And this is a technique that when you first start watching Dragon Ball, this is like a fearsome technique. This is like a big martial arts move. Also, I don't know what the hell he's doing. Like, I don't know what this technique is other than he looks kind of like a wolf.
I'm so torn on this one. I don't know. This one, I like that it's grounded in martial arts in a way. Every time that this is shown, though, the visuals are not that impressive. Like, I think part of that is it being in like the earliest episodes of Dragon Ball before they really got moving. But it's basically just him with like these open hand claw attacks, and I think there's maybe some kicks in there after that, if I remember correctly. But it's honestly just very underwhelming. The fact that there's a wolf involved too, like, is the wolf just kind of shows up in the background. I don't know if that's just supposed to be.
And it howls, and that's what makes the technique.
Yeah, that's why it's the wolf fang fist. It feels weird to me. Even the name seems silly, and the visuals. I don't know. I don't have a lot of positives to say about this one, other than the fact that it's one of the only like martial arts techniques.
Yeah, and it's not just another beam. I feel like they tried something, and it was kind of a swing and a miss. I don't think it's the most egregious thing, to be honest. It does start becoming a meme after he uses it 30 million times, and it stops working. But I'm not going to hold that against him because I'm just here to rate the technique itself. And for me, I give it a C. I don't think it's offensive. There is some interesting aspect of it because it's almost like a fighting style, but it's not illustrated very well. So I ding it. I don't know. Dude, what do you think?
C is what I was leaning towards too, because I want to give it points for being a martial arts technique, and I feel like I think you said, it is at least more interesting than just another beam. So I think that keeps it out of D for me, but everything else that I already said about it knocks it down quite a bit.
All right, yeah, I'm telling you, you weren't the worst, so you're moving up in the world.
You're out of your crater.
So moving out of Yamcha's crater, we're moving over to Future Trunks. And I think we had to look up the name of this technique because you said it had a name. I didn't realize it had a name. We're rating the Burning Attack. And if I remember correctly, this is where he like blurs his arms all around his chest doing these super awesome dance moves and then blasts freezes bits into dust.
Yes, that is correct. We did have to look this one up. I get Trunks's technique names mixed up between his Finish Buster and his Burning Attack, but this one he shoots out like a yellow key ball after doing his sick dance moves. I love Trunks. I even love this technique. I feel like I'm going to be a little bit torn here because, especially as teenage Todd, watching him do all those dance moves I thought was super cool. But as an adult, I'm like, that is wildly unnecessary. Why don't you just shoot the attack?
There's some sort of weird thing where it's just like, yeah, like if it was, 20 years ago me, this is an obvious Z. This is the coolest thing on television.
Oh, yeah.
But 30-ish year old me, it's a little over the top. It's still kind of neat, but I can't tell if that's just me reminiscing about how cool it was. And let's be real, it is just kind of a key blast after all of those moves. There's not really anything going on other than just, a bunch of key in that direction. But it looks cool. I mean,
uh, this one's gonna be hard for me to place, honestly. I I I think I like that it is. I like that it's a key ball. It is just yellow, which meh. The yellow does kind of fit the Super Saiyan aesthetic for Trunks' introduction, I guess. Uh, uh, I both love and hate the hand movements. Like, especially looking at what we've got right now, I would be so torn between putting this in B and C for me because I think I like this more than beam attacks, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I would put it up there with Destructo Disc or not. I I think I would lean towards B on this one for me because Destructo Disc is a little plain, even though I think it would maybe be a little bit higher in the B tier than maybe this one.
Yeah, so if I just watched it yesterday, I would probably put it in C tier, but I'm allowed to take into account how cool I thought it was when I was 14. So yeah, I'm gonna put it in B tier and average that out a little bit. Um, I mean, it was so cool. I'm sorry. I'm allowed to let my bias just seep into there.
I genuinely, man, like Teenage Todd loved this, thought it was the coolest thing on the planet.
So yeah, it's just when you're a teenager, that shit's really cool. So yeah, it can go in B tier. It gets the teenage like double up vote.
Yeah, I'm okay with giving it a little bit of a nudge because of that.
Now, up next, actually, let me open this water. We've got
Mhm.
the turtle hermit himself in Master Roshi, and we've got this is where we stuck the Kamehameha, and I mean it's tough with Master Roshi because he is a martial arts master, and during the tournament with Goku, he broke out like half a dozen different weird one-off techniques. And so we had contemplated like picking one of those ones, like the lightning or I don't know, other stuff he had going on. He also had the ceiling technique too that we had considered, but I don't think we could do a tier list without having the Kamehameha wave in it somewhere. And so we gave it to Master Oshi because it is his technique.
Yes. Now, and just to reiterate, we basically, when we were deciding on techniques and characters, we assigned a single technique to each character. So that did limit us a little bit. But I think it made for a much more manageable tier list for us instead of having a bajillion techniques.
Oh God.
Uh,
Rate
so,
every technique in Dragon Ball. Go.
yeah, exactly. And that's one of the reasons why we put the Kamehameha here where we did. We wanted to use one of Goku's other iconic um, skills or techniques with the Kaioken, but we didn't want to have a tier list that didn't have the Kamehameha on it. And Master Roshi is, I mean, the Kamehameha is named. I mean, he's the Turtle Hermit, Kame House. All of that is kind of his shtick. He's the one who created the technique and taught it to Goku. So
Mhm.
he is the OG Kamehameha master.
And so I'm going to personally take into account some of the things that Goku did with that technique because it shows the capability of it, the stuff it could do. I'm not going to just rate it on Master Roshi's use because he kind of taught it to Goku. And then Goku did all the stuff. So this might be double dipping Goku a little bit, but it's still Master Roshi's technique. So deal with it. um, yeah. And for this one, you get some cool things going for it, right? It's blue. Blue's cool. That's a different color. That's not yellow. We're already off to a pretty decent start here, right? And then we see it used in some really creative ways where like Goku's riding around on top of it. He's leaving it in spots and then using it kind of remotely. So as far as like key attacks go, it appears to be one of the most dynamic key attacks in the Dragon Ball universe.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I mean, it gets shot out of Goku's feet. It gets used to propel him away from attacks. It gets used as like two balls and launched up at Frieza. Uh, it gets on, I think on multiple occasions, it gets kind of like curved to be rerouted in a different direction. It I mean, there are some people call certain versions of it the Super Kamehameha, where it's just a
Mm-hmm.
massive ki blast.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I mean, I would say this is one that in a way, I want to come back to and compare to the Destructo Disc, in that what we talked about with the Destructo Disc is it's not very versatile and doesn't grow, I think is the way that you put it, Dayton. And to your point about Goku, Goku took this technique and really changed it, really used it in a lot of different ways. So it's hard not to see this as being one of definitely a high rated technique in my mind.
And when Roshi first unveils it, it kind of seems like it's the most powerful key attack in the world at that time. He sunk an entire fleet of ships with it. I mean, and at that point, we had not really seen key attacks at all. And then Roshi just whips out this thing that just, takes up the entire horizon, sort of thing. So at its time, when we first see it and we're introduced to kind of key attacks and martial arts, this thing's on a whole different planet. Like, it kind of set the tone for how powerful Ki Blast could be.
It's even been used to blow up the moon. So
Yeah. So for me, I think at base level, if you look at it, you're like, oh, it's a C tier. It's just like Galagun, right? It's like, no, it's a lot more dynamic than Galagun, and it's used in a lot more like different creative ways. Um, I, I mean, it's whatever the narrative needs. The Kamehameha can kind of be. So for me, I'm somewhere between A and B once again.
you know what? I honestly was originally thinking B tier, but the more that we talked about it, I feel like I would put this in A. It's admittedly, you could probably do the other things that like Goku or other people have done with the Kamehameha with something like the Gallic gun. However, we don't ever see that. We see all of that versatility and the kind of like growth of this technique, well, through of ki blast, a big ki blast through strictly this technique. So honestly, I would lean towards A on this one.
I'm fine with A with it. I mean, part of me is just like, I think the technique just does cool stuff because they want it to. I don't think there's any rhyme or reason for it, but I'm here for it, man.
Yeah, I mean that is true, but it is. I mean, it's iconic for a reason, and they use it all the time. So
I'm cool with that. So it lands in A tier, and I'm perfectly happy with that. And we're gonna go ahead and flip the page a little bit because we're going from Master Roshi and the most iconic good guy attack, and we're flipping over to the most iconic bad guy in Frieza. And Frieza actually has cool techniques, and we had to talk about this for a little bit because at first it was just like, all right, do we want to go with the giant planet destroying ball? Because that's pretty freaking rad. But it kind of just blows up planets, and it's a big ball of ki. So I think we can do better. The little torture beams are cool as hell, but at the end of the day, they're still just like little ki blasts. So we went with, I don't know if this one's ever used more than like once either, but we went with the imprisonment ball, which is the one on Namek where Frieza kind of encapsulates Goku in a prison of ki and then just starts beating him around.
this was another one that Dayton and I actively had to go look up the name for because I don't think they ever at least in the dub, they don't ever express the name of the technique. And like you said, Dayton, Frieza has a lot of techniques, but they're, as much as like the death ball looks cool and the death beam is very strong, this one stands out to me as just being something that is unlike anything else that we see pretty much in all of Dragon Ball, especially with the idea that when Goku is imprisoned in this ki, if the ki ball itself touches anything other than Frieza and Frieza's body, it explodes, like detonates on impact.
Those are some cool facts that you can only learn by watching the original Dragon Ball series and not Kai.
Oh yeah, I don't think that they express that in Kai, do they?
I don't think so. But
I mean, yeah,
isn't that so fun? Like, it's like we've got this technique, it has a purpose, right? This is for Frieza to just enjoy torturing somebody. And it puts that kind of sense of just like life or death in somebody's like mind. And so like, all right, yeah, if I try and leave and touch the ground, I explode, but otherwise I'm stuck in here just being beaten to death. So, I mean, it's iconically Frieza. It's got cool rules. It's interesting. What is there not to like about this technique?
This one is awesome. I mean, it literally turns into Frieza just kicking the shit out of Goku, like kicking him around in this prison of ki. Goku can't really defend himself, can't hardly do anything about it. The end result turning into Frieza like rocketing Goku in this ball of ki towards the landscape. Goku only getting away from the explosion. I think he uses Kaioken to outrun the explosion effectively. But man, what a cool technique. This one, if you can't tell, I like this one a lot. So this one's probably going to rate pretty high from my side.
Yeah, and once again, this is one of those ones where I wish we would have seen it more. I wish we would have seen this technique used more often because you only get this one little kind of snippet of what this technique does, and you want to see it more. You're just left wanting. And so this is one where I want to rate it somewhere around A tier, but I don't know if I want it to go to Z tier or B tier because at the same time, you don't see it do anything other than Goku that one time, but it's also so goddamn cool.
Yeah. I mean, I'm trying to think of like the downsides too, because like this one felt like Frieza kind of had to catch Goku off guard to even use it on him. And yeah, I guess it's not very versatile. Like this is not something like the Kamehameha that can be used in a lot of different ways, right? But man, when you do use it, it's fucking cool. I was leaning towards A is kind of what my feeling was. Maybe because it's not super versatile, and that's why I would kind of keep it out of Z. I don't know. What do you think, Dayton?
I'm fine with
landing on?
I mean, it's not like say with the Kaioken where there's this like there is drama just by using it. The Kaioken's very special, so I think this one it's really fun. It's really unique. But I could see how the Kaioken would be in a tier of its own compared to it. So yeah, I think A tier is very fair.
Yeah, we're getting through a good chunk of our list, and we've only got one Z tier right now. So I'm curious if we'll have anything else that meets up to the Kaioken in our minds.
Well, let's see if Cell matches up to the Kaioken with his birthing Cell Junior's technique. Oh man, just saying that out loud was weird. Yeah. So I mean, we've seen like cloning techniques or after image techniques. We've seen stuff like that, but I mean, this is Cell literally making little clones of himself, almost like I don't know. It feels like it's something similar to Cybermen, but just grosser in every way.
Absolutely. Now this one. I pushed a little bit for this one. Not that Dayton gave me much pushback, but when we were talking about Cell, because he has so many different techniques, right? But most of his techniques are stolen from other people. This is one of the few techniques, maybe the only technique that he uses that is exclusive to him and his weird biology. But not only that, birthing Cell Juniors, I mean, I think there's 7 in total, if I remember correctly, and they are nearly as strong as Perfect Cell himself. They are whooping the shit out of both Trunks, Vegeta, and Piccolo, who are, arguably the other strongest fighters besides Goku and Gohan at the time. I don't know, man, there's some really interesting pieces to this technique, not to mention how many questions you have about Cell's biology.
Yeah, I mean, you get all these little mini-me cells, right? And you start wondering, like, can Cell just, like, populate a planet on his own? What's the application of this? Could there be 1,000,000 cells? Like, what? I don't know. I have questions. I have a lot of questions about this. The other one that I had considered, but I don't think it's as interesting as far as Cell's techniques was the him blowing up and exploding a planet, but I don't find that to be a very interesting technique. So Cell Juniors is probably his better unique technique. And I don't know how I feel about it. It feels like Cybermen with extra steps. It also, like, I don't know, it's just more guys. I don't personally find this technique to be super interesting, like super cool. It's good, yeah, but it's not interesting to me. And so for me, I don't know. I don't rate this one very well. I don't find this one like cool to watch. So, but it is different. And so rating it is where I'm really struggling with right now. I feel like it's in the ballpark of C tier. It's definitely not B tier, but it could be D tier.
Ooh, interesting. I was almost like all of the things that I said were pretty positive about it, but I think I also agree with basically everything that you said, Dayton, where it's more to me that it is interesting because it's so different. I mean, you made a good point that Multiform and Cybermen kind of fall into the same category, at least in some way, shape, or form.
Multiform is so much more interesting to me because there's a downside to it, and there's kind of this back and forth. Whereas I don't understand the to get more cells thing. It just seemed like there was never really a downside to him doing that.
You'd think that it would use a bunch of ki or energy, but they never really express that in the story. So yeah, I agree with you. It doesn't feel like there's a downside, especially given the fact that they are almost as powerful as Cell himself, and clearly more powerful than the Super Saiyans at the time. So yeah, that is kind of.
Oh God, just notice the picture you chose for that. Oh God, oh no. Why did you just choose the one with the children? Why'd you have to show his birthing hole?
It's got to be. I wanted to see the moment the technique is activated.
It's so beautiful. Ugh.
Yeah, I could just hear that like the nasty sound they make when they come out.
Also, but don't ever say birthing hole to anybody. That stays purely in this podcast. It does not leave this podcast.
Oh man, yeah. I don't. What else do you call it? I don't know. I think I'm leaning towards C tier, which perfect for Cell.
That sounds good to me. It's not just another key blast, but it doesn't really like move the needle for me.
Yeah, I don't think it's as bland as Chaozu's self-destruct. I think it's more interesting than that. But yeah, it's not wildly interesting or flashy.
It's also funny to me now that Chaozu's just down there. He gave up his life to be in D tier. All right, let's
poor little guy.
All right, so after Cell, we've got another villain, and we've got Boo. And Boo was a tough one because Boo doesn't have the most interesting set of abilities to choose from. He can turn people into chocolate, which is fine. Like it's a good ability. It's not an interesting ability to me though. It doesn't make the fight compelling. It's not fun. Narratively it's fun, but as far as like a fight goes and a cool technique goes, for me it just didn't rank. He also had, I don't know, the ability to regenerate, and we've seen that before. But I kind of we went a little abstract here. We actually went with his kind of gummy, taffy biology, his ability to kind of bend and stretch.
Now, this was an interesting one. So, whereas the last one was one that I was kind of pushing for, this is one that Dayton, you were pushing for when we were coming up with our technique list. And I gave a little bit of pushback on this one because it's weird to call this a technique, right? I think the one thing that actually kind of convinced me was that on the wiki for Boo, it lists his techniques and it's specified as his gummy biology. And so I was like, okay, well, I mean, admittedly, as far as Boo's gummy biology goes, I love it. I think it's super cool, super interesting as far as the fights. It's just like, it's hard to define whether this is just part of his like physical makeup or if it's an actual technique that he's using.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, well, would you count like Frieza's tail as a technique? Like, it's kind of the same question here. But for me, so much of what Boo does is based off of his weird, stretchy biology. And it's also one of the things that's very, very unique to Boo is the way he's able to kind of stretch. And when he's fighting, he's like throwing his punches through the ground and stretching out and coming back up out of the ground. Um, I really wanted to put this in here, and it's our tier list, so we can put whatever the hell we want in here. But I think this is something that is so fun to watch, and it's so unique in Dragon Ball, and it's done so well. So we could have just picked the candy beam, or we could have just picked his ability to absorb and transform, which are all actually, even his ability to absorb and transform might be part of his biology. I have no freaking clue. But just his stretch Armstrongness, I think, is the most unique part of his fighting. And so for me, I wanted to push for this because I'm really excited. All of Boo's best fighting bits are the parts where he's really utilizing that anatomy.
Yeah, I mean, we somewhat recently recorded some of our watching of the Boo arc, and I mean, both Dayton and I were just gushing about the fight particularly with Kid Boo against Goku. And honestly, 70% of that is probably because of Boo's weird body. And like you said, Dayton, his like Stretch Armstrong, like underneath the ground, and where the picture that we have for this one of him like turning his body almost into a parachute to stop his momentum. There are multiple times where he turns himself, like rolls himself into a big gumball and then just flings his own body around to try and deal damage. Like, there's so many interesting ways that his weird gummy body can be used, and they make for really fun to watch fights. So in the end, I'm glad that we put this in here. I think this one's really cool.
Well, we might have to debate this a little bit, because for me, I do not like Boo as a character. I'll just lay that out there. I think he is one of the most interesting fighting styles in Dragon Ball. He's so interesting to watch move around. And so I think just that gummy biology itself is fun to watch on the screen every time you see it. It is so interesting. And there aren't very many other techniques that I can say the same thing about. This is right up there with Kaioken for me, because it adds this drama to the battle that's happening. I think it is super interesting. It's one of Dragon Ball's most unique elements that they implemented very, very well. So this would be Z tier for me.
I'll be honest, I think I'm on board with that. It does so much. Like, he can do so many different things with it, and it's so interesting, and it's so, I mean, it's both flashy and fun to watch, as well as just wildly effective. And I really can't think of anything that is similar to it. Like
the closest thing is the stretchy arms from Piccolo. That's the closest thing I can think of.
And that's way more that is far less utility than everything that this gives to Boo. But that's a good comparison. Honestly, yeah, maybe it's a bit of a cheat, because this kind of feels like it encompasses multiple techniques just because his body is so strange. But I would put this up in Z just because of how wild and fun it is.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fighting style. And to me, you could compare it to the Wolfang Fist, where it's kind of a technique he's using and he's fighting that way. So there's an argument for it. And I like that argument. I just think it's the best part of Boo. And if we're going to pick something from Boo, I think we're going to pick the best, most unique fighting thing he does. So I'm definitely shoehorning that in. And I'm happy it's in here because I like that it's in C tier.
Yeah, I'm totally on board. Yeah, I think it's almost like a category of its own, but it is pretty damn awesome. I think that kind of takes us on to our next guy, though.
Yes, which is the Time Assassin himself, Hit. And I mean, he basically has one interesting technique. The rest are kind of he punched fists through hearts and stuff. So we're going to go with this time skip. And this is an interesting one because we see him use it. And then as he's fighting with Goku, we see him getting better at it and making the technique like last longer. And I it is very neat. I like Hit a lot. However, I think this technique is kind of like instant transmission in that I think it's kind of boring too.
I would agree with that. I wanted to put this one on here because honestly, Hit might be the best thing in all of Super, or at least the best character that's introduced.
Yeah, Hit's great.
Uh,
I love Hit.
yeah, he's cool. He makes for a really fun and interesting fight. Um, and when I say fun and interesting, it's more because he's like a problem to solve for Goku and Vegeta. I agree with you, Dayton, that it's unique. Like he can jump through time, and it's a challenge to overcome. But it's not exciting beyond the narrative reasons that make it exciting.
And my thing is I think man, I don't think you can bring up Hit's time stop with or time skip without bringing up the fact that we've already seen this sort of technique before in Goldo in the Ginyu Force. I think Goldo's implementation is better than Hit's implementation. I think I like that there's different restrictions to it. I like that the way that it's displayed and the decision making that Goldo has to make. Also, that there's kind of this weird downside that's not really discussed about Goldo's time stop, in that he never actually had to learn to be strong.
Oh yeah, yeah, that's an interesting point too. I mean, to say nothing of the fact of him having to hold his breath, but
Mhm.
yeah, the fact that he's basically just able to off people because he can stop them in time. He doesn't have to get strong. Um, I agree with you. I mean, I'll say another kind of downside in that vein for Hit's time skip is I don't like, this is maybe a weird route to go, but I don't like the fact that basically his time skip can be overcome by someone just being way fucking stronger.
We'll get to that soon. Don't worry. No, I my thing is if I had to choose like abilities to like make for myself to fight with, I would definitely choose time skip. That is an incredibly powerful ability, but it is not a cool ability. Ugh. And it's not really the most interesting ability. I think there are way more interesting abilities. It's kind of neat, but I don't know. For me, this ranks pretty low.
Okay.
I would probably put this in C tier, maybe D tier. I don't,
Oh, wow.
yeah, I don't rate this one very high. I don't think it's an interesting ability. I think it's very powerful, but I don't think it's interesting.
Okay. I was leaning B or C.
Oh, okay.
I don't think it's as like, I think looking at what we've got right now, I think it's not as flashy as beams, but at least it's something a little bit more unique. There's only a couple instances of it.
Mhm.
I feel like it makes the most sense for us to kind of split the difference here, though, and probably throw it right in C. I also was looking at it being with Wolfang Fist, and I'm like, I think I like it better than Wolfang Fist.
That's fair. All right. Yep. Let's do a high C. It's definitely a high C.
Yeah, I think C is appropriate. Because it's still kind of, I don't know, it's a little bit boring. Let's put it that way.
Like and the way it like gets stronger is you just skip longer, and that's not the most interesting to me.
Right. Yes, that's a good point. I agree with you.
All right. With Hit in the books, we're moving on to our favorite, biggest, baddest guy. And we have Jiren. And Todd, why don't you go ahead and tell us about Jiren's technique?
Jiren has one technique, and that is what we have dubbed punchy punchy.
I don't think there's a ton to talk about here. This Jiren's just overwhelming power, overwhelming might. He doesn't name anything. It's all just kind of key blasts and punching and being angry. So yeah, his punchy punchy technique feels like a D tier to me.
Easy D tier. Like, this would be the only thing that I would maybe put in an F tier if we had one. But we've talked about Jiren before. If you guys watch any of our Dragon Ball Super stuff for the Tournament of Power, we don't like Jiren. Jiren's boring. Uh, he has maybe like, I think he maybe uses one ki blast. Maybe. I'm struggling to even think if that's the case, but he has almost no techniques, almost nothing. He's super boring.
Yeah, and I don't know. It stinks because that final fight is one of the best animated pieces of I guess anime you could ever watch.
Oh
And
yeah.
he's with such a boring character, it blows my mind.
Yeah, 100%. But yes, Jiren's punches are going into our D tier, even below Farewell, Mr. Tien.
All right, so this is where we're getting into a couple characters we had to add because they're just so gosh darn interesting, you know? How could we leave them off this list? And we're gonna talk about Android 16 because he has a fucking rocket punch, and I love that. That is just cool as hell.
I couldn't. We really couldn't do a tier list without Rocket Punch. I needed this in here because it's a rocket punch, man.
Well, and especially like at the era of Dragon Ball, they decided to add it where like we're going to other planets and people could teleport and like all this crazy shit's happening. And you're like, well, my arm is also a rocket, so like it's kind of pretty rad. That's pretty rad.
It's yeah. I mean, you're at the point where you've defeated Napoleon, Space Hitler, and Frieza, and you know planets are being blown up and stuff, and yet you have one guy who's like, I'm gonna shoot my fist into your face.
Like I don't need to stretch my arms. My arms just go over there by themselves.
Hell yeah, they have, I mean, literal rockets propelling them. I don't know, there's just something that is hilarious and fun, and just novel about this technique to me. I feel like it's unlike really anything else that I can think of. Like stretchy arms are maybe the closest thing that you could compare it to, but I feel like this one's gonna rate decently high, not super high for me, but
Yeah, and I mean it's this is very comic book thing. And you know, Dragon Ball originally started off as a manga, right? And so when you get that comic book kind of stuff happening, I think you got to recognize it. For me, oh man, it's definitely above C for me.
I'm kind of leaning towards B. I think I don't
I
know.
think it is B tier because I mean, it's a rocket punch. We've seen rocket punches before. I also don't know what direction you go with rocket punches other than it's a freaking rocket punch. Um, does it need anything else? I'm fine with B tier. I think B tier is good enough. Like I definitely tip the cap. Like you got rocket arms and you shot them with your fist. Like, thank you. You did it.
Yeah, I gotta give it at least B for just it's a fucking rocket punch. I think I've said that 2 or 3 times, but come on.
You can't say anything else. It writes itself. So yeah, rocket punch, B tier, baby. Let's go.
I think that gives us what our last guy on the list.
Yes, the official list ends with Dabura. And this is a character I think both Todd and I actually really like a lot. He's somebody who actually has interesting techniques. He can summon weapons to his hands, he can breathe fire. But the one we went with was probably his more iconic ability, which is his stone spit, his ability to turn people to stone by spitting on them.
I mean, this is gross. This is cool. This is
That freaking picture. Oh my god.
just hawking a loogie.
Oh.
It's it's wildly unique. Like, I mean, I'm trying to think if there's any other instance of somebody being turned to stone in Dragon Ball, maybe, but I feel like even in other media, it's rare that you see somebody who does it with their spit. Like usually it's maybe like a Medusa's gaze or something like that, or even like a monster biting you. But yeah, the spit is it's unique, it's effective, it's shocking when it happens for the first time. Like Dabura is just a cool dude.
Yeah, I like a lot about this technique. I like how interesting this technique is. Now, because I have to critique everything, the one thing is I don't know where this technique goes. other than you just spit on people.
Fair.
And the other thing is that it's also not the most flashy technique. So it like when it happens, it is dramatic, but there's only so much cool factor you can get from spitting on people. So I do knock it a little bit for that. But I mean, it's still fun. It's very fun in the Dragon Ball universe, and it's kind of that constant threat that he could do it at any point that makes it interesting.
Yeah, and Dayton's doing a good job of kind of like balancing out my excitement about certain techniques. Because yeah, you're right. This has no room for growth. There's not really any diversity. It doesn't. I mean, seeing it is surprising, but it's not like flashy and cool to see necessarily. Uh, yeah, I mean, there's not. I don't know. There's a whole lot more to talk about with it. I would lean. I'm like kind of in between B and C personally. I feel like I would lean more towards B, but what are your thoughts here, Dayton?
I think it's a low B for me. And I
Low B,
only
yeah.
say that because I think Rocket Punch is cooler than it, but I look at everything in C tier and go, I think this is more interesting than all the stuff in C tier. So I think it's at the bottom of B tier for me, but it is B tier.
I think you and I were of the same mind in that way. Yeah, I think it beats out pretty much everything in our C tier right now. So yeah, I'd put it at bottom of B as well.
So yeah, spitting on people is just a little less cool than shooting them with your rocket fist.
But it's cooler than normal key blast, apparently.
Oh my god. And I mean, I want to go through our honorable mentions really quickly here. But before we do that, I want to take a moment to appreciate how even our tier list is, how perfectly symmetrical everything turned out.
Cell would be so happy with us right now.
And
Perfect.
the thing is our tier list isn't just built on each other. It's kind of comparing each ability to the rest of Dragon Ball. And so that's why B is kind of in the middle, is because we picked the best. We went through and we picked the coolest techniques from these characters and then compared them. And I mean, there's a lot of really cool techniques in Dragon Ball. Some characters got hosed like Chaozu and Jiren, but I mean, Kaioken's rad as hell, and Boo's gummy biology is just so freaking fun.
Yes, 100%. Yeah, and our list again is not exhaustive. We trimmed everything down to be like, okay, one technique for a character. There are probably other characters that we could have included on here. And actually, with that in mind, why don't we go through some of our honorable mentions that we didn't necessarily put on the list?
Yeah, and the first one, and I think a lot of people are probably screaming right now that this person didn't make it onto the tier list. So we'll mention him. This is Gotenks, and we picked his Super Ghost Kamikaze attack.
Yes. When we were talking about characters to add, I think we ended up nixing fusion characters. Part of that was probably so that Dayton could keep me from making this list way longer than it needed to be. But admittedly, we were trying to pare it down to like either primary characters or like iconic characters, and we decided that fusions are kind of like their own category in a way.
Yeah, and so that's why Gotenks is here. Otherwise, for me, I think the Super Ghost Kamikaze attack, if I had to put it in a tier, it's probably A tier. I think it's more interesting than most of the ones in B tier. I think it's a great technique. It's a lot of fun.
I'd probably put it up there too. Gotenks has a lot of cool techniques, which is kind of the only bummer about keeping him off the list is he's got a lot of cool stuff going on. But I think we've got another fusion after him.
Yes, and this one's, oh my gosh, actually we have another fusion after that too. All right, so the next two that we need to mention are Gogeta and Vegito. And do you remember the difference between the two? I already forgot.
So Gogeta is the fusion dance between Goku and Vegeta, and then Vegito is the earring fusion.
Okay. All right. And so that makes them different people.
Yes. At least in the Dragon Ball world, those fusions are considered something different. Vegito, we kind of saw at the end of Boo. Gogeta, I think your reference point for Gogeta would be the Broly movie.
Okay, cool. All right. And for these two different characters, for Gogeta, we have the Soul Punisher slash Stardust Breaker.
So this one is. I mean, this one was iconic from. I think this is actually a movie that Dayton has not yet seen, but we will probably watch this in the future.
I love that technique.
It is used in the Broly movie, but it's a little bit it's harder to pick it out, I guess. It's very iconic in movie Dragon Ball Z movie 12. But you those of you who are familiar with it, it's like this rainbow disco ball in his hand that when he hits the target with it, it almost lets out like this glitter through the target, this like rainbow glitter. I think it's super cool as far as at least visually, and not to mention like the name. It has two different names. It's either Soul Punisher or Stardust Breaker. I love both of those names. It's I think this one would be really, really cool. This one would be easy A for me, maybe even a Z. This one's cool.
You know what? I agree. So Gogeta's Soul Punisher, easy A. And then Vegito, he's got the spirit sword that we see him actually use against Boo.
Yeah, I mean, I like this one a lot. I like swords a lot. I don't know. I don't think this one is as cool as the Soul Punisher. It is in some ways just kind of like a yellow beam, but it's also a sword. I don't know. This one would probably sit in like a B tier, maybe.
I think I agree with the B tier. The spirit sword mostly feels like it's there just so that way Vegito can like say badass things, but I'm okay with that.
Yeah, it doesn't bother me.
I think that brings us into Android 17 though, and we're gonna rate his energy barrier.
I like this one because it's one of the few defensive techniques, and it's I mean, it's not terribly flashy, but it's cool, and it creates some, I don't know, some interesting scenarios where you're like, oh, he just got messed up, and then you're like, nah, bitch, I got a barrier.
Yeah, and I think Super did the most with it because we see it used in the Boo Saga like once. And then Super, this is actually something I will appreciate Super for, is they tried to make that like his signature technique, right? He's shielding himself, he's shielding friends, he's putting multiple shields up to stop techniques. They're really exploring that space with it a lot in Super, which if we didn't have Super, this would be like an easy like C, maybe even D tier for me. But because we really get to see what that technique could do, and that it's not just, field around person, I think that elevates it a little bit for me. It's a now more interesting technique. And I would say that because of the way it's used, it's at least as interesting as the Destructo disc. So for me, it's kind of a B tier.
I would agree. Probably a B tier. I like your points about like watching a technique grow and change over time too. So I think that makes it definitely sits up a little bit higher for me.
Ginyu Force, notable techniques, body change, Raccoon fires cool mouth laser, time stop. Jace is there.
Crusher Ball!
Crusher, he's got the Crusher Ball is easy. Crusher Ball is D tier. That is the most boring technique. Get out of here.
It's super silly.
Guldo, like I said, I think he's the more interesting version of Time Skip. I put him in B tier because there's like weird downsides and things happening, and he only has so much time to think about stuff. I don't know. I like it on Guldo.
I agree. The body swap is at the very least interesting. Makes for interesting like narrative moments. Yeah, they've got a couple of interesting techniques in there. But yeah, we didn't cover there's some interesting techniques and then some very uninteresting techniques in the Ginyu Force.
Yeah, it's a mixed bag, which is probably a good thing. It makes them kind of a very diverse and unique cast, and I like that. So overall, if I had to rate the entire Ginyu Force as just like one thing on this list, I'm gonna go with G tier for Ginyu Force.
That's perfect. I like
outside of that, what are your thoughts on Hakai and Ultra Instinct for the angels and the destruction gods.
These are weird. Like Ultra Instinct sits in such a weird spot for me, especially because it's kind of a transformation and kind of a technique. Um I mean, anytime I get to watch or read about Ultra Instinct, I think it's super cool. At the same time, it almost feels it's hard to describe in the fact that it almost feels overpowered while also when it doesn't do what it's supposed to do, like it's supposed to be the ultimate originally it's supposed to be the ultimate defense and then it's supposed to also kind of be the ultimate offense. So that feels strange to quantify against another fighter, especially if the other fighter is stronger than them. Then it just means that Ultra Instinct doesn't do anything. I don't know. It falls into such a weird category.
Yeah, and I will say narratively, I actually like them both. Just from the narrative point of the universe, that makes sense to me. Kind of the angels' state of Zen and how they're untouchable, and then the destruction gods having this ability to like evaporate anything from existence, which is part of their job. So I like narratively both of those techniques. However, they are incredibly basic to me. One is just a make things disappear, and then one is I can't be touched. So as far as interesting goes, I don't rate either very high, but I like them narratively. So as far as the cool factor, I don't really give either that much cool factor, especially because like the Hakai was just resisted. So how destructive is it?
That drops Hakai for me a lot. Yeah, for sure. And then I agree with you, especially about Ultra Instinct. The one thing that I will say to Ultra Instinct's favor is that I like that it is kind of bringing back the roots of martial arts in Dragon Ball Super, where martial arts has kind of taken a very big back seat. So I think that part of it is cool, but there's so many things about it that are just kind of weird. It would probably fall into like a C or something for me. I don't know.
Yeah, for me it would be, I mean, Hakai would be C tier. And then I don't know, Ultra Instinct, I would say high C tier. I don't think it's there's not, I don't know, when I look at something like Kaioken, it's so freaking interesting and cool and there are downsides, whereas I don't know. I just don't, I want more out of Ultra Instinct. I feel like there needs to be another layer for me to really appreciate it.
Yeah, I would maybe give it a B. Yeah,
I could agree with B. If you went with B, I'd be like, all right, man, that's fair.
Yeah, it has some things about it that are just complicated and make it tough. I think one last one that we might have skipped over a little bit here though, but that we didn't really have a good spot to put it is the solar flare.
Oh, we wanted to put that one in on somebody for so long because it's one of those techniques that is so simple but so useful and gets used all the freaking time. And I'm very appreciative of this technique because of just what it is. It's such a, like, yeah, if you were playing around with ki energy, you would develop this technique because it's hyper effective and realistic.
I mean, using this, like, Cell uses it many times to get out of like sticky situations. Krillin uses it to avoid Frieza, who's way stronger than him, and for himself to get out of sticky situations. Like I think Tien maybe uses it more in like a fighting capacity, like a more like I'm going to use this and then whoop your ass sort of thing. It's in that way, it's like a great utility technique. I don't know if we're just rating it on like cool factor that it would necessarily rate super high, but I feel like it's unique. Like it's in its own kind of utility category, and I feel like we had to at least mention it because of that.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's not another ki blast. And the second you're not another ki blast and better than that, I want to put you in B tier. I'm already thinking about B tier.
I very much agree with you. I think we kind of dwelled on those for a little bit, but I think that's all of our
There's a lot of honorable mentions. And I
Yeah.
also think there's probably a lot of techniques too that people would like us to mention. So hopefully we mentioned your technique. if we didn't, we'll come up with a tier list of everyone's ignored techniques at some point in the future. So I don't know. We'll gather them together. We'll rank the fan base's techniques.
That would be funny. Yeah, I mean, maybe eventually we'll do like a speed run of all the techniques, or like the most powerful technique or something different. But
Oh, it's the raccoon boom, baby.
Raccoon Boom.
I love that character.
He's so much fun. But yeah, this was something a little bit different. We were, trying something new. This was a pretty fun discussion. Was there anything else that you wanted to say about our topic tonight, Dayton?
No, other than I think everyone's gonna be seeing a lot more weird stuff coming out of us as we experiment with our format going forward.
Yes, everybody, please enjoy seeing weird stuff come out of us.
Oh God. Could you get rid of that cell birthing picture? I'm done staring at it.
No, in fact, let me zoom in on
God,
that.
no, don't
Hang on. Can I zoom in? Oh,
We just broke it. There we go.
there.
Make that the thumbnail for this episode.
Everybody enjoy Cell's birthing hole.
Oh.
And that's it for this episode of Instant Transmission, where we discuss everything Dragon Ball. This has been your host, Todd.
And Dayton.
Don't forget, we're on Patreon and Twitter. If you want to make our power pole extend, I didn't change that in our last notes. So you guys get that another time.
Do it live.
You can find us at patreon.com/ITDBpodcast and over on Twitter at x.com/ITDBpodcast. Our podcast episodes come out every other Monday morning, so you can enjoy some Dragon Ball goodness on your commute. Also, please like, review, subscribe, whatever all that podcasting stuff is on your favorite platform. Thank you all so much for your support. Be sure to join us next time as we embrace our android overlords with an AI-written Dragon Ball short story. Dayton's going to use his Dr. Gero skill set in collaboration with ChatGPT to create the perfect short story that he will then present to me for discussion. Will Goku be written out of the story? Will Krillin finally become relevant? Will Princess Trunks rule over the Saiyan race? Find out next time. And to all our fellow Dragon Ball fans, stay safe out there, and remember to keep rocking the dragon.
It's bad when you have to use AI just to get your character included.